Welcome to Retirement Unlocked with Larry Heller. Your life, your way, unlimited possibilities. Join us as we explore how tailored financial planning and investments can help you navigate life transitions with confidence. Let's dive into this week's episode.
Welcome to the Retirement Unlocked podcast with your host, Larry Heller. Today, we're going to discuss estate planning in retirement. Our guest today is Wendy Goidel, founder of Goidel Law Group. She's an estate planning attorney and elder law attorney who helps families protect their loved ones and their assets with compassion and care. Wendy also created Concierge Care Coordination, a unique approach that combines legal planning with social work, and she's been recognized as one of Long Island's top 50 women in business. Larry, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Wendy, for joining us today. I'm excited. We're going to talk about some estate and retirement planning. We're going to cover a lot of different areas, give you guys some little tidbits, some things to think about. So thank you, Wendy. Why don't we kind of jump right into this and kind of just talk about kind of the basics, like what are the essential estate planning documents which should be a part of everyone's comprehensive retirement plan?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for having me on your program today. It's a pleasure. So there are a number of components that would a part of a comprehensive estate plan. And I know we're focusing on retirees, but the most important document for everybody would be a durable general power of attorney, and a very comprehensive one. And that's a document where you, as the principal, would name trusted agents to be able to step into your shoes and handle a whole host of legal and financial decision making. So basically, whatever you can do for yourself, your trusted agent can do for you. So it's really an important document.
Right. So this is if you can't act, you get hurt.
If you become incapacitated or unavailable to act for any reason, so generally it's upon incapacity, but can be used, let's say, if you went on a trip around the world and you weren't available to go to the bank and do some banking or any other type of decision making, your trusted agent can do that for you. So that is a document that everybody over the age of 18 needs, because failing to do that, even though, you may be married, you may have a spouse, your spouse does not have the legal authority to make decisions for you, believe it or not. That might work for a lot of people, but when we've seen situations where there is no power of attorney, the individual now lacks the requisite capacity to sign a power of attorney, and there's no choice but to resort to a guardianship proceeding, which is something that we want to avoid at all costs.
Right. And that obviously wouldn't account for if it was a joint account with husband and wife.
Yeah,
right?
Well, that's a little different if it's a joint account. But if you have an account in just your individual name, nobody else can act for you if you do not have that power of attorney in place. So that's always the number one document, believe it or not. I mean, everybody always, Laurel, I should say, a lot of people lead with, oh, you need a will. Right. The will is another legal document. Well, a will is part of a traditional estate plan, and a will is a document where you create your set of instructions of how you want your assets to be distributed after you pass away. So I always equate it to a death plan, because there are no instructions of what happens during lifetime. So a will needs to go through a process called probate if the decedent has assets in his or her individual name when they die. So more modern planning typically consists of trusts, one or more trusts for different purposes. So a trust is essentially a legal entity that takes ownership of somebody's assets, and a living trust is one that's created during lifetime and typically covers 3 phases of life. 1, now while you're alive and well. 2, if you become incapacitated. And 3, when you pass away. So it's a more detailed set of instructions for how somebody wants their assets to be spent, how perhaps they want to be cared for. It names successor trustees to step in and act for them in the event of incapacity. And when that individual passes away, those assets pass directly to named beneficiaries. So it avoids any kind of probate or court proceedings. That's one type of trust We can get into many other types of irrevocable trusts that are used for different purposes. That could be estate tax minimization or avoidance. It could be for asset protection. It could be for creditor protection. So when we talk about trust-based planning, we have to talk about what that client's goals are, what their needs are, what they're trying to accomplish through their planning. So a more modern plan would consist of trusts essentially to have those good set of instructions in place and avoid court proceedings.
Yes, I mean, these are all great things. I'm just going to kind of throw in sometimes from my side that we have clients come to us and they have these revocable trusts and they have these great wills and everything. And a lot of them, unfortunately, don't realize that, one, if they have a trust, they have to still have to change their investments into the name of the trust. They think they create this trust and they don't put everything in the trust. So that's kind of one of the things that we see. The other thing is people think they have these wills and they don't realize that their insurance and their the way their accounts titles kind of go before the wills. So those are kind of the things. I don't know if you see that a lot, Wendy, but we see that a lot.
Yes, I mean, we do see that, unfortunately. It's really important for people like me, estate planning attorneys, to work with people like you, good financial advisors, to work as a team to make sure that if a client is creating a trust, now we could create the best set of instructions. It could be the greatest trust in the world. And I'm just joking when I say that, but it's only paper unless it's funded. And that's what you're talking about. We need to make sure those assets get into the trust or are beneficiary designated to the trust. Otherwise, the trust is going to fail. And then that individual who paid all this money to someone like me to create this lifetime trust, now the beneficiaries are grumbling because now they still have to go through probate. So, so the last part of our process in our office is to make sure that the trust is properly funded and is updated. So, and people think, oh, I have a will, so that means that my assets are definitely going to pass through the will to the beneficiaries I've named in the will, but they haven't coordinated it with their beneficiary designations. So it's all intertwined. So when we do comprehensive planning, we have to work together to make sure that all the beneficiary designations are appropriate and up to date, that they work with the documents.
Yeah, it's so important. I'm glad you do that because I can tell you, I've had clients that have kind of been upset with their estate attorney after they've had these documents and they said, no one told them that they had to kind of go through this or follow it up with them. So keep that in mind. It's great to have all these documents, but you got to make sure that they're executed and they're done properly. So whatever your wishes are, they will happen the correct way.
Correct. Absolutely. So those are the documents that kind of direct where the assets go and how they're distributed, whether it's outright, whether it's further trust for beneficiaries. The other lifetime documents that are really important that everybody needs would be a healthcare proxy, a living will, a HIPAA authorization. In our office, we combine all those three forms into one document so that there's no inconsistency. So a healthcare proxy names one or more agents to be able to, again, step into your shoes and handle your healthcare decision-making, your medical decision-making in the event of incapacity or inability to communicate, even if it's temporarily. We incorporate the living will language into the healthcare proxy because the one decision in my mind that you don't want to leave to a loved one or an agent is the decision whether you live or die. So we incorporate that end of life decision making into the document so that it's very clear that it's your decision. So your spouse or your child or loved one does not have to direct the hospital to remove you from life support. Doesn't have to say. So it's clearly sets forth the do not resuscitate order, do not intubate, don't use any artificial means to keep me alive, just give me pain alleviating medications. So it gives peace of mind to the loved one. And sometimes if an individual names a healthcare agent, an alternate healthcare agent in the document, but let's say they have multiple children and they're not naming all of them as agents, they may want to have a separate HIPAA authorization that would give authority to other individuals to be able to get information, not make medical decisions, but to get information. So let's say you're in the hospital and child number 3 is not an agent, but wants to call the nurse's station to find out how mom and dad are, they can have that authority.
Yeah. I know they're not most pleasant things to really talk about, and a lot of people don't want to, but it's so important that you have these. So when that time comes, you're not kind of fumbling around and trying to figure it out at that time.
Right. I always say the only people who like to talk about disability and death are people like us.
That's true.
Joke.
So let's kind of, talk a little bit about, some of the other things that maybe can happen and derail a retirement plan, such as, a long-term illness, which requiring some other costs. And why don't you talk a little bit about what you can do about that?
Sure. I mean, I think the number one thing or issue that can really derail a good financial retirement plan is failing to factor in significant long-term care costs, the cost of care. And in New York especially, it's extremely expensive. Like, I could have the best retirement plan in the world, but if I haven't figured out how I might pay for future care costs, I might not have enough money to pay for those care. I might end up spending a lot of my hard-earned assets to pay for the care. So we need to understand what the cost of care is and what the different payer sources for care and where we might get that care. So, for example, that care could be received at home. Ideally, we want everybody to be able to age in place in the in the residence of their choice. And if we can bring care into the home, private care is about $40 an hour. So if somebody needs significant care, and you could do the math on how expensive that might be. If someone needs 24/7 care, around the clock care, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Assisted living communities, that can run anywhere between $5,000. That's rare. Up to $10,000 is more of the norm. $10,000 a month and more, depending upon the level of care that an individual needs. And skilled nursing facilities, which we try to avoid at all costs because we want people to, live in the least restrictive environment, is somewhere between $18,000 and $20,000 a month in New York. So, you see all those ads that say, "Can you comfortably retire on $1 million?" Well, that $1 million probably will get spent down pretty rapidly if you need to pay $20,000 a month, whether that's at home assisted living or a skilled nursing facility. So, so knowing the different payer sources for care and how to plan around that is really important. So a lot of people who come to talk to us think, well, Medicare is going to pay for their long-term care. And it's a very common misconception because people confuse Medicare and Medicaid. So Medicare does not pay for long-term care. It only pays for about 20 days in a let's say in a rehab facility. So we need to look at other sources. So private pay. So we have high income, high assets. We can self-insure. We can pay for our care ourselves. But one of the biggest tools that I suggest is that everybody look into long-term care insurance, because we can't just rely on the Medicaid program to pay for the cost of care if we become destitute or qualify for that. So long-term care insurance is something that I think everybody, at least the ages of 50 and up, should take a look at. Let the insurance company pay for the care in the future, and that could go to paying for home care, assisted living, or nursing home care. And then, the Medicaid program is for individuals who qualify financially. It's a government benefit program, but that requires planning proactively in advance of a crisis. We could still do planning in a crisis, but then, it's going to be harder to, there's no way you're going to be able to protect all your assets in a crisis situation. So understanding the levels of care, the cost of those levels of care, and where you want to get that care is something that really needs to be addressed and focused on, because we can't just say, oh, it's not going to happen to us, because statistics show about 2/3 of individuals over 65 are going to need some level of care in the future.
Yeah, and we can have a whole podcast just about that. I mean, we have those conversations too, and sometimes people wait till it's too late, and then the long-term care insurance isn't an option anymore.
Yeah.
In New York, they've really, unfortunately, limited now some of your insurance options that are out there. So make sure you're working with somebody who can provide you the best options for you. But self-funding is something that is something we do as part of the retirement plan, is really taking if you can and you have enough money to self-insure, really taking that out and kind of putting it as a separate pot and actually investing it differently. So all great ideas, all things that should be looked at. And, Wendy mentioned age 50. I mean, that's really the time that you really want to start looking at this. You don't want to wait until you're 70 years old, and insurance may not be an option for you. So the earlier, the better.
Right. And if you're married and one spouse needs significant care and there was no planning done, you run the risk of depleting assets to pay for that spouse's care, leaving the other spouse destitute. And then the kids are never going to be happy because there goes their inheritance. So there's so many factors intertwined.
Absolutely. So let's kind of talk a little bit about kind of legacy planning. And a lot of people kind of wait and they wait and they wait. Unfortunately, some people, and we've all heard about the public figures who died without having wills or having a plan together. But legacy planning isn't just about transferring wealth at death. So why don't you talk a little bit about some of your thoughts here on legacy planning?
Right. And when I address legacy planning, it's really about the intangible assets that we want to pass down to our loved ones. It's about, it's more than just the traditional wealth transfer. It's really about making sure that we can document and pass on our values, our stories, our hopes for the future, our memories for the next generation. And those are the assets, those intangibles that people tend to overlook when they're talking about their planning. I mean, I always say, we as estate planners can create the best documents to pass on wealth, right? But that is a big topic that is overlooked. So, it's like creating the treasure map for your children or the road map and encapsulating all of those stories that are going to get lost. And, the successor generations are not going to have all of that. And they may not, and those are the things that can impact their lives. And, it could be about, what charities did you feel strongly about? What are your hopes and dreams for the future generations? How do you want to be remembered? What are the blessings for your children? What's your history? Tell the stories. A lot of people don't know these things. So, I mean, in our office, we've created a guide to creating an ethical will. And that ethical will is the encapsulating all of the legacy planning. And that can be in many different forms. Could be a letter, it could be multimedia, it could be photos, it could be videos. So there's so many different ways to capture all of those treasures that are going to be lost if they're not documented.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great thing to do. I mean, I think a couple of years ago, there was someone out there who created something called a legacy letter. Basically writing a letter to your children, and now while you're alive, to give it to them. And it actually hit home with me. I related personally to it because actually before my dad died, he had written me a letter that I still have to this day, and kind of treasure that. And a lot of times when we work with clients that have parents who have passed on, they're not fighting over their money. They're fighting over some of the intrinsic things, the jewelry. I want this piece. I want that piece. So, putting that into writing, but also putting all your wishes and your memories. I've heard people say, I wish I had my mom's recipe for this particular food. So all those things are great that are really not thought about by a lot of estate attorneys.
Right. That would be like the icing on the cake. That's the last piece. And that ethical will, or however you create it, is fluid, is ongoing. It could be, you could work on it over your lifetime. It doesn't have to be one and done. So there are a lot of tools. We're actually going to start working with a website and an online platform for our clients to create these. And there'll be a personal side and a kind of the practical and then the personal side to this. So.
Great.
Really,
I love it.
really
Can't wait to see that. I think that'll be that'll be great. And then
I will send you
just
the
really getting those
little
things out besides the money and the estate taxes to be able to provide that and ongoing generations.
Yeah, that brings more value to the families, I think.
Speaking of taxes, let's just kind of, talk a little bit about some taxes. I'd be remiss without bringing up estate taxes, especially here in New York, because the estate taxes are a little bit different than the federal taxes. So why don't we kind of just talk about the New York State, estate taxes, and maybe how you can eliminate or reduce them.
Right. So probably a lot of us have heard that federally, the estate tax threshold is going up to $15 million per person, starting in 2026. New York currently has a $7.16 million estate tax threshold, meaning you can pass that much estate tax free to your beneficiaries, to your heirs. But New York is a little different than federal, and New York has a kind of a punitive tax rule that says if your estate is over 105% over that threshold, you're going to pay tax on the entire amount of your estate. So if your estate right now is between 7.16 million and a little over 7.5 million, you're only going to pay tax on that additional amount. But if you're over 7.518 million, you're going to pay tax on the entire amount of your estate. That's one of the benefits of living in New York State. So
yeah, I always joke the best estate planning you can do in New York is move to Florida.
Yeah, and Florida and New York State Department of Taxation and Finance loves to find those people who really don't qualify, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about officially moving to Florida, not unofficially moving to Florida.
I mean, and if you're married, you can pass twice that much to your beneficiary. So it's important to make sure that if you're married and you're kind of at that, let's say you're at that $15 million threshold amount, that your assets get divided half in each spouse's name, so that when basically I always try to explain the estate tax is like having a coupon, which you're going to lose the benefit of that exemption if you own your assets jointly. And when one spouse dies, now the surviving spouse now has 15 million. So the surviving spouse is way over the threshold amount, much more tax that's going to be paid. But there are ways to get below that threshold amount through dividing the assets, through different gifting strategies during lifetime. There's annual exclusion gifting that can be done. You can gift to charities. Can make medical and tuition expenses. You can pay that directly to the providers. So there's ways to bring your estates down to be below those levels. So so even if today
let's just go back and clarify that a little bit and make it a little bit more simpler. So for federal, there's roughly a $15 million exclusion for both spouses, and you don't have to worry about it because technically it's portable. You can you can wait until the second spouse dies, and you're getting 30 million. But in New York, you can't do that, right? You've got to take advantage of doing this before the first spouse dies by setting up certain strategies and making sure you have certain assets in each one of your names, correct?
Correct. So if we let's say their spouse, the husband has 7 million and the wife has 7 million, and let's say we fund those trusts that we talked about earlier with the 7 million. So the first spouse dies. I'm going to say it's the husband. Okay, just for purposes of the discussion. Husband passes away. We don't give the wife this other 7 million. That 7 million is going to go into what's called a credit shelter trust or a family trust or a B trust. And that trust is outside the surviving spouse's taxable estate. Okay, so she can spend the money in her trust. She does have access to income and principal, but she doesn't control it. So whatever's left in that credit shelter trust when she passes will go to the children, let's say, or the other beneficiaries that can grow estate tax free. So we need to carefully and with you look at how to fund these trusts properly so that we can take advantage of those two estate tax coupons, because you're right, there's no portability in New York.
Yeah.
So if you don't use it properly, you're going to lose it.
Yep. So, if you're in New York and you're bumping up against that $7 million, don't wait. Make sure that you do some of that planning now that Wendy's talking about, because it can end up being, the cliff tax and what we call in New York can end up being a significant amount of estate taxes that could be avoided with proper planning.
Right. We also add in certain clauses. They call it a Santa clause, so that if you ended up passing away and you had a taxable estate, your executor trustee has the discretion to make a charitable donation to bring your estate under the estate tax level. So whatever the tax you would have paid could go to a charity. Everybody's happy. So that's something that we can build in. When we do build in to all of the planning.
Right. And I laugh about that because I just came from a client meeting and we were actually reviewing that with the attorney, and I brought that up and wasn't in there. So that could be a very important factor. And so making sure you have the right attorney, making sure you have that right clause in there could end up, again, saving your children hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right. And also to be aware that New York State does claw back gifts made 3 years before, within 3 years of death. So important to, again, do all the planning, as soon as possible, to keep it updated.
So we've only touched a little bit about kind of estate planning and retirement planning. Any final words you want to mention?
It's also important. I think one of the other things that are overlooked from my experience on the elder care side of the equation are having a good set of instructions for how you want to be cared for if you become incapacitated. So we create what's called a personal care plan for our clients, which is a detailed set of instructions that basically sets forth in writing what your entire world looks like, what your daily routine is, what you like to do, what you like to eat, what you like to watch on TV. It's akin to caregiver instructions or babysitter instructions. So a lot of, if you do become incapacitated, who's going to know how it is you want to be cared for and what your entire world looks like and what your routine looks like. So I think more planning on the life care side and making sure that you have a good set of instructions for what happens to you during your lifetime, because you're going to be alive a lot longer, right?
Hope so.
Right? I hope so. So the goal is to really kind of think about those things and incorporate your life care planning and your legacy planning in addition to the traditional estate planning. It's not just about passing assets at death. There's a lot of other considerations that are so important to enhancing quality of life and passing the values to your kids.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, that's great. Many estate attorneys do not get into that legacy planning and then holistic planning. But I think it's just so critical to encompass all of it together. So Wendy, if somebody wants to reach you and discuss all of that, what's the best way of them reaching you?
So they can call me 631-390-5600. They can go to my website, www.goidellawgroup.com. Reach out to me, send me an email. We do complimentary consultations. It doesn't cost anybody anything to come in and talk with me, whether it's Zoom or in person, to get the right education and options for their planning.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Wendy.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.
And thanks for tuning in to Retirement Unlocked. If you found this episode helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might benefit. Want to take the next step? In the episode description below, you'll find a link to Heller Wealth Management's website with more resources and the option to schedule a complimentary 20-minute phone call with their team. Your ideal retirement starts with a conversation. Let's get started. We'll see you next time on Retirement Unlocked.